Greater Phoenix. We can tell our story differently. A new perspective. A different look. Greater Phoenix A to Z.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where this finds you. Welcome to the Greater Phoenix A to Z podcast. I'm your host, Casey Gilchrist. Joining me on the show today from the GPEC staff is a former journalist whose international writing experience includes coverage of the 2016 Rio Olympics. Additionally, prior to joining GPEC, he covered 5 bowl games and wrote about the Suns, Diamondbacks, Cardinals, and Oklahoma City Thunder. He's an award-winning writer, manages all of our presentations here at GPEC, and is one of the nicest people you will ever meet. Logan Newman, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I feel like that makes me sound a little too distinguished, but
award-winning, yes. That's awesome. We brought Logan into this conversation because today's show is all about sports. In less than a month, our region will host the Super Bowl and the Waste Management Open all within the same week. This is a sports fan doubleheader of epic proportions. Phoenix is a unique sports market with 5 major sports teams. We have the NFL, NBA, WNBA, NHL, and the MLB. Only a few other regions in the country can say that, including Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, Minneapolis, New York, Los Angeles, and DC. Phoenix is also home to 2 Division I college sports programs and a lower division soccer team, the Phoenix Rising. So we have a lot to cover today, so we have called on an expert to help us unpack all there is to know about sports. So our special guest is a 4th-generation Arizonan. His family was actually one of the first to come to Arizona in the 1890s. He's also a graduate of the University of Arizona. Go Cats. Congrats on the win this past weekend. And he grew his career in agriculture. He spent 20 years in partnership with his brother. That is brotherly love at its finest. And he is a Phoenix Art Museum board member and also the president of the Salt River Project and executive chairman of the Arizona Super Bowl 2023 host committee. Woo! Arizona's very own David Rousseau. David, it's fantastic to have you here with us today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Awesome. So we're going to play a fun little game so that our listeners can get to know you better. And me and Logan can get to know you better as well. It's called 2 Truths and a Lie, where you're going to give us 2 facts about yourself and 1 lie. So are you ready?
I guess.
Well, hit us with your truths and lie, and we'll do our best.
So my first job out of college, I was a banker for the wine industry in Napa, California. I guess my next in the series of truths and lies would be I turned down the scholarship offer to play football out of high school, and then you already teased it a little bit, so it's going to fall into the truth. But my experience along the way prior to coming to SRP, I was a vegetable farmer.
Okay, so we know you're the vegetable farmer, which is what did you grow?
Really kind of every vegetable under the sun: carrots, broccoli, melons, and then a whole bunch of green leafy winter vegetables.
I'm going to need to know your secrets.
what was the college you got a scholarship offer for?
University of Arizona.
Logan, what are you thinking? What's the lie? Banker in Napa or former high school athlete?
It's tough because the first one was very specific, maybe too specific. I'm going to go with the first one.
I'm going to go with the second as the lie.
You are correct. I was a banker, and no scholarship offers for some reason. Crazy.
Well,
5'9", 160, mediocre speed. Seems like there would have been
not a very good kicker either.
No call for that.
Awesome. Well, I've also heard you like to spend a lot of time outdoors as well. What's your favorite outdoor stop in Greater Phoenix, or your favorite hike or view?
Yeah, I think probably hiking Camelback is the pinnacle of what it's sort of our Disneyland, if you will. And I always marvel. It's a good physical test, but then you also are rewarded with this unbelievable, majestic view of the valley.
Do you prefer sunrise or sunset hikes?
Really no preference. I got stuck up there one time and it was dark and there were rescue helicopters flying overhead and park rangers warning you that your car was going to be locked in by the time you got back. And so I guess I would err on the side of there's less chance of that happening again if you go in the morning.
Very true.
Honestly, that's another awesome two truths and a lie little tidbit there.
All in one. You're picking up on my lack of sincerity throughout it.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump into the meat and potatoes, as I like to say, and talk all there is to know about sports. So I guess just a qualifying question is, what is your favorite Greater Phoenix sporting event to attend? We have many to choose from annually, but what would you say yours is, David?
I've been in working with the Super Bowl. I've been blessed to attend more than my share of Cardinals games, and when they're winning, it's nothing better. And sadly, we've taken an opposite turn of late. I have to say, as a U of A fan, if U of A playing basketball and winning at Sun Devil against the Sun Devils up here is probably my favorite thing.
Were you at the game?
I wasn't, but it's always schizophrenic to be in that crowd and have obviously the prevailing sentiment in the crowd is contra to what my desire would be, and so that's a great sensation. I think Logan wants to say something. He's knocking to get in.
What about yours, Logan?
Honestly, I would also go with ASU versus U of A. Whether it's basketball or football, the games tend to be very competitive, or a big ASU football blowout win.
Okay.
And either way, they're a lot more. The rivalry is a lot more fun there than any other sport environment we have in the state. I really enjoy those.
I have not been to an ASU U of A game yet in any sports, so I'm going to have to put that on my list. I just got the wonderful opportunity to attend the Fiesta Bowl this past weekend, so that has been and I think I was very fortunate because not all bowl games are like that. Although the past few weekends have been, but Fiesta Bowl has been my favorite sporting event so far annually that I've attended.
The gamblers that chose the over probably are pretty excited about that outcome.
That is true. And we've also had a lot of new events kind of come to Phoenix over the past, few years. I had the benefit of going to the AVP Sand Volleyball Championship that was at Footprint Center last summer. The World Baseball Classic is coming this year, from what I've understood, in 2023. The men's Final Four will be here in 2024, and then the women's Final Four will be here in 2026. Are there any others that I'm missing that you can think of? Any other new ones that are coming?
I think just the usual annual events.
Yeah. And what do you think is bringing mega events like this to our region? What do you think's driving that?
Well, I think it's certainly the success that we've enjoyed in hosting the Super Bowl. I think is kind of the ultimate challenge and probably ultimate validation that we're a major league city. And, it's not just sports centric. To be able to host it, you have to have a symphony and an arts community and an economy. And so all those things I think are on display when we host the Super Bowl, and it's driven. It's a nice aside to our economic development, which is why we're here at GPEC's office, is how the Super Bowl gives us this opportunity to tell our story or a positive story about Arizona, and while we've got the world's attention, and I think having delivered on that promise in previous experiences, we've enjoyed being in that rotation for the games to come back.
What about you, Logan? Anything to add?
Yeah, I think weather is a key piece too.
Mm-hmm.
You see snowstorms, blizzards in other states, and having that domed roof really allows it to be two football teams, taking away the variables of the weather, allowing fans to enjoy themselves without freezing.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I will say Phoenix has had its ups and downs in sports history, many heartaches, as you were mentioning earlier, David. When the Cardinals are up, they're up, but when they're down, it's hard. And you're both originally from this area. What are your top sports moments in Phoenix sports history? What would you say? As far back as it could go, as far back as the 80s, the 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I think, again, it was obviously fantastic when the Diamondbacks won the World Series and defied all of the odds. I think the Cardinals' run to getting to the Super Bowl and having Larry Fitzgerald run down the middle of the field against the Steelers, thinking that that we were Super Bowl champions for a minute there was probably one of the highlights, certainly. And no, we've been blessed that obviously the Suns have been on a tear the last couple of years, and so it's been sprinkled around. So,
What about you, Logan?
Yeah. Growing up in that 2000s era, from D-backs getting good in 2000, Dan Marley, Jason Kidd on the Suns, through that Cardinals Super Bowl run, that really did drive my love for sports and kind of where I am today, what I've done, just watching those people, the 7 seconds or less, trying to play like Steve Nash. What's 7 seconds or less?
Yeah.
Yeah, Quinn Richardson, exactly.
Explain, unpack this.
For those who can't see, David just did the little Bulls horn Quentin Richardson three-point thing. So basically, when Steve Nash came to the Suns, him and Mike D'Antoni led a charge, kind of revolutionized the way offense was played. Basketball was kind of slow at the time. It really ran through bigs. It ran through the Shaquille O'Neals. And they turned it into a very fast-paced, three-point-driven game. And it was really, really fun. It was a way that other teams could not keep up with them, and they ran to wins, and it was a lot of fun to watch.
Oh, interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah, if Robert Horry hadn't been such a thug in knocking Steve Nash out, we'd have another championship to point to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no one I hate more than Robert Horry.
Oh, man. Well, hopefully the Suns will eventually claim the title, especially in this modern era. I'm hoping that we can get one before CP retires or goes on to another team.
They're clearly not peaking too early this year.
That's a very optimistic way to say it.
Yeah. In doing my research on sports history in Arizona, I noticed that in '93, we actually lost the Super Bowl due to some state legislature refusing to recognize, I think it was MLK Day. And of course, It came back in '96, and that's when America's team won its last championship, which it could happen this year. Right? I'm a Cowboys fan, so I always remember '96. But it's just interesting to see how the power of sports and how it can impact.
How old were you in '96?
I was 5. But that's how I grew up learning football, was seeing the Cowboys in their prime. And so that's how I became a Cowboys fan, was seeing them win the Super Bowl in '96. But I will say that it just shows the power of sports and how it can kind of impact things outside of sports as well. So very interesting. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious, with your work with the planning committee, have there been times like that where you've had to navigate both the politics and the sports aspect of it?
Sure. We had a gubernatorial candidate recently who kind of out of the blue threatened that if the NFL inserted itself in state politics around, I think, the border and our relationship with Mexico, that she was going to summarily cancel the Super Bowl. And I was hoping that if that was going to happen, she'd go ahead and do it, because it's a lot of work to go to, and that goes into the preparation for the Super Bowl and fundraising and whatnot. But anyway, thankfully that didn't happen. But yeah, no, I think there's that. Sports transcends a lot of different layers and throughout an economy or a community, and I think it's an opportunity to be very positive, but it also is ripe for other issues being tagged onto it.
Yeah, and let's jump into the Super Bowl a little bit deeper. How does a community even bid for a Super Bowl?
Well, it's a great question. I think the easiest way to kind of be in the running is for a community to build a new stadium, and that's how we got the game the second time in 2008 after the initial stop and start. So, and then I think it's a matter of delivering on that Major League City promise that we talked about earlier, and I think that's how the game comes back. And as Logan pointed out, our weather is terrific. We were apologizing for some drizzle and cooler than normal temperatures last time. And I remember a journalist that was doing the interview from this, so this would have been 2015. Was from Boston or Massachusetts, and he's like, well, my relatives are in Nantucket, and they haven't had power for 5 days, and we're not sure that they're still alive. And so all of a sudden, Arizona's weather basically spares you from all of those kinds of exposures and risks and hazards. And so I think, and then again, we've just done a great job, as you pointed out, the Waste Management Open's going on. I think for all of our Thunderbird friends, which are great partners and in our sports and business community, and the philanthropy that's come from the waste management, but they have moved it when the NFL moved the date of the tournament in conjunction with the PGA, obviously, to continue to align with the Super Bowl timing when the NFL extended their season by one additional regular season game, and so. One way to argue, let's spread that out and not have it on top of each other. But I think it speaks to kind of the resiliency of the Valley and how many different offerings we can simultaneously entertain.
Yeah, and I understand there's a fundraising component to bidding for Super Bowl II. How much does a community need to raise?
Yeah, more or less, we've raised about $50 million, and it is a competitive. The franchise of hosting Super Bowls is a competitive one. I talked about building a new stadium as how you get into contention, and then it's a matter of I think us and New Orleans are two of the only markets that have hosted at the number of times that we have. And so obviously that speaks to Logan's reference of how great the weather is here and how entertaining it is to go to New Orleans, apparently. And so I think as we continue to deliver on that promise, hopefully we'll continue to enjoy being in that. Obviously, there's more and more new stadiums. We used to have the distinction of being in the West with a new stadium. That's no longer a unique distinction given LA and SoFi Stadium and Raiders Stadium in Vegas.
Yeah, and how do you raise that much money? That's a good chunk of cash. How does one even begin to start raising a lump sum of money like that?
Well, I think the way we did it was to kind of bring back a leader from before, which was Jay Perry, who ran it for us last time in 2015 lead up. So she was generous enough to come back after some really cool professional adventures in between to put together, assemble a professional staff that she's been successful in doing again. So that's kind of where it starts, and we then borrow from the relationships that she's engendered with the NFL and the community here, and then just kind of delivering on that promise. There's some dedicated funding sources like bed tax around hotels and whatnot, which generates some of that. We've got great participation regionally from the cities, from Phoenix to Scottsdale to Mesa, and Glendale has been a great partner who hosts the game. But again, the regional aspect of the way we approach hosting visitors that, going to the game, it's probably 70,000 people that come to town. And then beyond that, we'll have a free festival in downtown at Hines Park that'll probably host along the order of 1 million people that'll come to downtown Phoenix. So, but I think to answer your question, it's more a matter of once having that opportunity and then delivering. We've got some great corporate partners. Probably a third of that money comes from our corporate community, and so organizations like Freeport-McMoRan, PetSmart, I can't help but plug SRP and APS for their support as economic engines to and again, we've seen our business grow over time, and the hope is by hosting the Super Bowl and being on that mantle for that time and telling a good story, that the creation or the connection to quality employers locating here, and it might start off as a second home or a retreat for your executive team, and then it morphs into relocating your headquarters here, hopefully, and then those jobs are translate to the future of our community.
Absolutely, that's something that we here at GPEC are hoping for, is just telling our story, showing people what Phoenix, the community, what we have to offer, and hopefully translating into some relocations or some expansions our way. And in terms of economic impacts, I was on one of GPEC. GPEC hosted a similar report, I guess you could say, or panel, a virtual panel a few weeks ago. The economic impact of a Super Bowl is astronomical. I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into that and kind of understand who benefits from the proceeds that we receive from the Super Bowl. And I understand a lot goes back to the community or to charity. Can you expand on? Yeah,
there's a several $1 million match with the NFL that is left as a legacy grants to the nonprofit community that's focused on education and health and youth sports. So that's sort of the focus at several $1 million that goes there. So any incremental or surplus in fundraising, we're able to boost that number, but it's a minimum of $2 million that's left behind in the nonprofit community. And that, again, is something those of us who work on this endeavor for the time leading up to it can point to, and with some pride, certainly. Beyond that, it's about taking advantage of that opportunity while you have your moment in the sun to tell your best story. And last time we had a $750 million economic impact, just an incremental spend of visitors. So it was triggered by, the survey was triggered if you had rented a car, stayed in a motel, or had a plane ticket to Phoenix that week, you were counted, and your spend was aggregated, and it was $720 million. I'm sorry, I exaggerated, and that was up by, I think that's roughly about a 40% increase over what it was in 2008. My best empirical evidence of that is we were doing something at the Sanctuary, which is one of the Valley's nicer resorts, post Super Bowl, and they were sharing how their revenues it was the best week they had ever had, to the tune of 40% better than the second best week ever, which, lo and behold, the second best week ever was the 2008 Super Bowl. So to me, I think and again, that's a resort that in the first week of February is always in demand, and yet the fact that they had that kind of success revenue-wise speaks to hopefully what the rest of the Valley enjoys comparatively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm guessing we're anticipating a larger economic impact. Are you projecting what that impact might be this coming year?
I don't. One would have to assume. I mean, it's bigger and better, and obviously the waste management is in a position we feel better and more confident, I should say, about how we're approaching it. And so the combination of it, again, hopefully we get typical weather but we know that there's going to be an intention. I thought it's interesting in our fundraising efforts or travels when we're meeting with the CEOs around the town, how many times people will take the meeting, for one, knowing that we're coming to asking for money, which is revealing. And they don't have to be a sports fan or in particular a football fan in order to tune in to the Super Bowl. It's really, Dan Bickley referred to it last time as America's campfire is the Super Bowl, and I think that's probably the best metaphor I've heard for it.
I love that. There's so much more than just the game.
Right.
It's the commercials, it's the halftime performance, it's the conversations of gathering around the TV.
Yeah,
Completely.
And then hopefully it's a good game as kind of icing on the cake.
Yeah. So when it comes to that 40% increase that you've spoke of, do you attribute that to the natural growth of the region, to branding improving around Phoenix and people seeing Greater Phoenix as a whole as more of a destination than in 2008 and previously?
Well, it was interesting. It's hard to compete with New York City for corporate resolve, and they had hosted the 2014 game, so a year before us. And effectively, other than Times Square, the rest of New York, Manhattan in particular, was sort of bothered by the fact that roads, there were some road closures and it altered their train schedules and whatnot, where that's clearly not the case when we're hosting. But again, it was 20 below in Brooklyn when we arrived the week of the Super Bowl in 2014. And so again, maybe you had the answer all along, that weather is the key factor.
And I would imagine an average resident in our market would say, how does a region like Greater Phoenix prepare to accept not only waste management, guests, which can be 100,000 plus, but also Super Bowl, which you said we're anticipating about 70,000 people. How do you factor in safety and security for receiving that many people?
Well, thankfully, we have a safety interface with probably about 50 different public safety agencies. And so I don't think there's a safer place on the planet than wherever we're hosting the Super Bowl. at that moment. And again, there's a lot of professionals, but it's a big intention, and obviously the one downside and exposure and risk would be for something to go wrong, and so there's an awful lot of effort that goes into making sure that doesn't happen. I think Phoenix is a regional market, and GPEC is more cognizant of that, given the patronage of having every Valley mayor on their board. We make the argument, and I think accurately, that having something like the Super Bowl in town, it might be in Glendale, and there might be a focus around Phoenix and Scottsdale, but every community has the opportunity to benefit. And I think if you look at the hotel room creation that's occurred from last to this time, I think the 40% number that jumped out, apparently that hasn't been a well-kept secret, and every community, I think, has done their part to further their ability to host out-of-town guests.
Yeah, and account for safety and security and all that jazz as well. I'm sure it's a coordinated effort amongst every community that would benefit.
Absolutely.
And one of my good friends lives nearby the Waste Management Open, and one of the benefits of how the Waste Management Open gives back to the neighbors that might be impacted by the crowds is they give them complimentary tickets. Is that similar to the Super Bowl?
I don't remember having anybody. There's not a line for complimentary tickets. I think, and a lot of times the challenge with public safety is they're not watching the game, right? They're having to watch the crowd, and depending on where they're stationed, and there's so many steps leading up to it, and opportunities for the festival that we have for 3 or 4 days leading up to the Super Bowl and at Hance Park. Will be a huge lift from a public safety standpoint, and Phoenix, while certainly central, is getting support from the other municipalities. But no, I think again, anybody that's parochial, I think, is going to be disappointed if they're sitting there wondering, well, why is this community somehow getting more out of it? And we've been certainly blessed with kind of neutral support throughout the business community, and I think the same to a large extent from our municipal partners.
That's nice to hear. And I have a fun question. I always ask this to sports fans, so I'm very curious your answer. If you were the NFL commissioner for one day and with absolute power, and you can either add or change a rule, what would you add or change?
It's a good question. I think I'd make some sort of special dispensation that would allow Larry Fitzgerald to come back and play next year without him having to be bothered by camps and off-season workouts and whatnot.
You would give him the same protection rules that quarterbacks receive.
Yes, exactly. He would have a free run to every end zone. No, it's I think Roger Goodell is obviously led the NFL during an amazingly successful time and tenure. And so I wish I had a better answer, but somehow the Cardinals would benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Logan?
Well, I appreciate you helping the Cardinals with your answer. How do I phrase mine? I would create a spirit of the game clause in which if a play is just so cool, it's an awesome catch, eyes closed, one-handed diving catch, but your toe hits the sideline, it counts. You're in bounds. It's a cool enough play that it stands. Basically,
a gray zone.
Exactly. Yeah. If I made the catch in a street game and somebody told me I was out of bounds and I would be willing to fight them for it to count, it should count. It's football. It's fun.
I think mine would lie similar to yours. I had two that I was going between, but I think I've decided an oopsie call. Like, one call per team, you get an oops call, where if you mess up, I know in the Michigan Fiesta Bowl, the quarterback didn't realize the snap was happening. He could pull the oopsie card.
Yeah, mulligan.
Yeah, or mulligan, exactly. My other one was the players could wear whatever shoe that they wanted, because I think their shoe has to match their uniform. to be able to
I
wear
thought
some
about
funky
that
shoes.
for my answer, but
I think that they would have a lot more shoe deals in the NFL with that.
Yeah, that would bring more money to the NFL, to the players, to the teams. Yeah.
No, I would love to see that.
I like that one for real. I know
Yeah.
mine's not a good one, but
Maybe we
yours
could
work
write
for
to
real.
Goodell and get that passed. Another important component of the Super Bowl that I'm particularly interested in every single year is understanding who the halftime performance is. Is the Super Bowl committee involved in that decision at any way?
I would have a lot more appeal and free drinks around town if we had anything to do with it. So, no, I thought it was interesting. We had a party last time, and I'm a big Darius Rucker fan, and he played at Tempe Center for the Arts for us, for our sponsors, and it had a fantastic concert. And we were talking to him afterwards, and he was making a not too subtle bid to be the halftime act someday, and in front of our owner, Michael Bidwell, and he went on to share that he had actually trademarked the slogan, there's 2 times a year, there's football season and there's waiting for football season. And just to speak to his fandom as it relates to the NFL. But no, we don't have anything to do with it. And it seems to be the choice this year with Rihanna seems to be a popular one and a welcome one. And so certainly look forward to it.
Do you know how the decision is normally made, what the process is like?
I think just that I know we don't have anything to do with it.
Okay.
And it sounds as though Darius Rucker might be your choice for
Absolutely.
a halftime performance that has never happened before. Are there any others?
Maybe if I go back to your commissioner question, in addition to having Larry Fitzgerald somehow be featured, I'd like to have, if I could have 1.5 choices, I'd have Darius Rucker just summarily be the Super Bowl act.
What about you, Logan? Who would you want to see perform?
I feel like I'm a bad person to ask that to, because all my favorite bands are from like 60s and 70s.
Okay.
So I guess just put Elton John and a piano up there. I'll be happy.
I will say I really enjoyed the halftime performance last year with the collection of, West Coast
West Side,
rappers.
yeah.
I would love to see that replicated, but from Southern hip hop artists. I'm from Virginia. And so I grew up listening to like Southern hip hop. So if I could have like Ludacris, T.I., maybe some Outkast involved.
Outkast might be my answer.
Yeah.
That would be fun.
Yeah, Outkast would be an amazing halftime performance. I'm just putting it out there.
Nice.
Maybe even Missy Elliott. That'd be
fun too.
I would buy a ticket for that. All right, so I'm excited for the Super Bowl. I think everyone is. We're excited for that coming week. It's going to be an amazing just week in Phoenix in general. But I kind of want to talk about the future of sports and what's next. Is there another Super Bowl bid in the works for future?
Well, I think there always is. I think to one of your earlier questions, I think my answer was, how do you ensure that you're in that rotation of hosting Super Bowls? And the best thing that this market can do right now is to deliver on the upcoming one in a few weeks and make sure that out-of-town visitors are exposed to our hospitality, Southwestern hospitality, and we have a phenomenal response from the community in terms of volunteers. I think we have 10,000 volunteers that signed up. We had like 4,000 volunteers sign up within the first hour of the day back in August, that we made it available to sign up to volunteer. And so that spirit and being proud of welcoming people from other places here is alive and well. And so hopefully that's something that we can continue to deliver on, and so that's kind of where it starts, and then hopefully it's a great game. Last time, unless you're a Seattle fan, it was a fantastic game and held your attention till the bitter end. And again, I think we just continue to be better and better at hosting. In addition to that, the state under Governor Ducey and the legislature formed a mega event fund group to continue to so that we don't have a stop in staff. So the staff that Jay leads, a lot of those people will go back to resume their careers, but we're going to have a Final Four, as you mentioned, next year. And so this new platform will stay in place and execute those other events that are already slated, but also be in a position to formulate bids for future events, and not just Super Bowls and Final Fours and national championships, but you can let your imagination go wild in terms of what other kind of mega events we could be hosting as a community.
Could that be Olympics?
I'm sorry?
Could that be the Olympics or
No, I think
perhaps the World Cup?
So I thought it was interesting. I think Qatar, the World Cup, was different than its normal timing on the calendar, and it had to do with their heat, relatively speaking. And so I think if you pinch that window, I think anything is possible if we had some flexibility on the calendar. For some reason, people don't like to come here from June to August.
I wonder why.
Yeah,
Can't imagine.
Crazy.
I know. I realized we used to host. I'm a huge motorsport fan, so I love F1, and I know Phoenix used to host an F1 race. I would love to see that come back because I saw Vegas has been added to the calendar as well as Miami. I've heard talks that New York might get added back,
Right.
but it would be great to have an F1 race come to.
So that's a curious. I've only been to one. I went to the Austin race one year. So you need to explain to me. I feel like from my limited exposure of just attending one race, that the fastest qualifier ends up getting a head start. And to me, it sort of is reminiscent of if you had an amazing thoroughbred horse like Secretariat, and Secretariat would get to start a quarter of a mile ahead of every other regular horse, and it would end up being self-fulfilling like so many F1 races are. But so explain the intrigue to me of what F1.
F1. So there's lots. There's the drama behind the drivers, number one. That's probably why I'm hooked the most. But in qualifying, you do have a qualifying round, but it's based on your position. So you qualify for position. You don't start earlier than the rest of the pack, I guess you could say, but you're in the lead position. And then the
That's starting ahead,
yes.
just so you know.
But not by time, by inches.
Just from a casual observer.
By inches. And then when the lights go out and everyone starts racing, it's the dart to the first turn, I guess you could say. And there's a lot of strategy involved and, of course, how your car is set up and everything like that.
Presumably the fastest qualifying car is going to make it to that first
You would
turn
think,
first.
but sometimes there are mistakes made and, someone could have the wrong settings on their steering wheel or what have you. So also there's strategy around the pit stops and everything. So I don't know. I've did never in a million years that I think I would be an F1 fan, but Netflix kind of exposed me to it. And then I started watching the races regularly, and now I have a subscription to the F1 TV.
Good for you.
I can wake up and watch it. So I would love to see it here in Phoenix. And also weather plays into the races as well. So a car could perform better in dry, hot climates versus wet climates. And so that could factor into you did well in quali, but your car might not be best in these types of conditions. So that's also another factor.
No, NASCAR's success in the Valley speaks to it's not a sport that resonates with me necessarily. I've always been punished for having a car that could go fast. And yet obviously it's a super popular fan experience and just almost kind of a communal experience that takes place similar to Burning Tree or Woodstock in terms of the massive crowd that assembles for maybe not even interested in going inside the racetrack, but it's a huge following.
Yeah. Logan, if you could have any mega event come to Greater Phoenix that's never been here before, what would you choose?
Oh man, that's tough. It's an interesting question. Logistically, I would love to see the World Cup, but I don't know if we have the number of stadiums to hold the mass influxes of people. But I think the World Cup would be a lot of fun to have here.
Oh, yeah.
I would love it.
I think the upcoming
celebration.
World Cup that's going to be hosted in LA, there's the potential that Cardinal Stadium could be one of the venues, but I don't know that how that it gets constructed. That and the halftime entertainment are something that I'm in the dark over.
All right. Well, to close everything out, I know we're running up on time. I really want to ask you, as a sports fan, what does sports mean to you, and why are they so important?
I think you talked earlier about sports making a difference, and the best kind of anecdotal advice I could, or example of that I've had in my experience. We had a PR firm working for us the last time, and one of the principals is a former Nike executive that was loaned to the U.S. military post Desert Storm, in Iraq in order to rebuild a national team. And so he spent several months going around and getting players to come back. And, there was a religious challenge because whether you were Sunni or not. And so anyway, he assembled a team, and then it was a challenge of, okay, now we need to find somebody to play. And so they ultimately got Kuwait, of all places, to agree to play, but there was no way they would host. Kuwait wasn't going to come and play a home game in Baghdad, and nor did anybody think it was a good idea that this Iraqi team would go to Kuwait. So Jordan ended up hosting the game on the condition that there was no fans. So he literally had organized this effort, and he was the guy running down the ball every time it got kicked out of bounds because there were no fans in the stadium. But it was televised, and so the game's over. Iraq wins, meaning they qualify for World Cup at the time. And he's flying back to Baghdad and thinking he's going to see his family in a couple of days because his mission is accomplished. And he gets a call from the general who's leading our military effort at the time. And he congratulates him, and then in the next breath says, when's our next game? He goes, I think we're done. And he goes, no, you have no idea. Conflicts were down. So daily, nightly conflicts were, in terms of the required of military response, we're down 80% during the broadcast. And so to me, that speaks to, I'm sorry it took me so long to get there, but it speaks to sports do matter, and they have this kind of universally disarming quality about them. And so this is our version of it, and we look forward to the NFL coming to town with its greatest prize and doing our best job of making sure that they want to come back.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on today's podcast. We really appreciated your insights and stories. I know I did. And thank you to our listeners for joining us for the second episode of the Greater Phoenix A to Z podcast. Tim will be back in a couple of weeks to walk you all through the semiconductor industry here in Greater Phoenix, including the CHIPS Act. So do me and our guests a favor and be sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast listening app. Also, if you are so inclined, please rate us 5 stars and leave a comment. To keep up with what's happening here in Greater Phoenix, follow GPEC at Greater PHX on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Until next time, be safe and well. Cheers.